Hey everybody, that's right, a re-review. Now, I know you're probably thinking, why aren't you working on the Spider-Man 3 review? I am. I just decided that I kind of wanted to take a break from it and work on something that it's been bothering me for a long time. Now, for those of you who know, Spider-Man 2000 was the very first review I did on this YouTube channel many a year ago, and since then I've kind of grown as a creator. And that video, despite it being my first, is something that I look back on and I cringe. I didn't really have form or structure back then, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did know that I wanted to talk about video games, and I wanted in particularly to talk about Spider-Man video games. And so here we are. I feel like I have to kind of right a wrong that's been bothering me. I wanted to do this for the longest time. I finally got kind of a little leeway to be able to do this. And so here is Spider-Man 2000 redone.
Most of you already know that Spider-Man 2000, for as simplistic as it was, is for all intents and purposes a good Spider-Man game. But the question is, why? Why is it that Spider-Man 2000 is held up in such regard? Sure, it was the first 3D Spider-Man game, and graphically the game definitely shows it, as it's pretty rough around the edges. Literally. But there's something about the game, despite many of its shortcomings, that would stand the test of time. The gameplay is simplistic and not nearly as complicated as something you'd see today. The consoles of yesteryear would implode in on itself if some of the game engines used today were implemented back then. You have your standard fare of punches and kicks mapped to 2 buttons, with webbing and jumping being paired to the 3rd and 4th respectively. You have web swinging and web zipping also mapped to the shoulder buttons and a manual targeting mode on the opposite side. All of these, while simple, work, and it's the natural bread and butter for the game. Nothing truly changes in how you're approaching things outside of certain enemies, but it's nothing too drastic. For a game like this, simple doesn't hurt as long as it works well, and for the most part, it does. The game shines the most when you start pairing different things together, like a punch followed by a kick for a unique combo, or the over-the-head web throw, which does no damage, but it looks cool. The same can also be said with webbing, which gives you unique properties depending on which direction you're holding in combination with the button. For web brass knuckles, to web domes, to impact webbing, and even the patented web yanks, Spider-Man's options are nothing but varied. Still though, despite having functional combat, it isn't the only thing about this game that stands out to longtime Spider-Man fans. The music composed by Tommy Tallarico is still one of the more popular soundtracks he's done just because of how good these tracks are, ranging from hard rock
do have hostages
to funk.
How many of them are there?
And everything in between. The music in this game is superb, and talking about it doesn't do it justice. It really is something worth listening to, despite many of said tracks being short loops and decompressed in order to fit the game disc, causing some tracks to sound a little bit crushed. Sound design is also pretty good for this era of gaming. Every sound is identifiable, with the grand wind sounds that accompanies web swinging, to the more brash sounds of gunfire from mooks, and even though the punching sound effects are a little cheesy, you can't help but feel that was perhaps by design. More on that in a little bit. The voice acting is also superb. Rino Romano is an underrated Spider-Man that unfortunately doesn't get talked about as much, but he really shines here, giving us a really good performance as Spider-Man, and nailing all the qualities you've come to love from the webhead, from his humor to his sarcasm. He's great, and I wish we had a longer stint with him as the character than what we got. He was only Spider-Man for a few years.
Being Spider-Man has given me a lot and taken a lot away, but one thing never changes. My responsibility to use my powers for others before myself, no matter what the cost. There are innocent people at Omnitech, and they need our help right now. I won't let them down.
Darren Norris is an absolute powerhouse as Venom. I know I've mentioned this before, but his Venom in this game is everything it needed to be, done to perfection. He pulls off the sadistic dark side perfectly.
Rest easy, Brock. Venom is here.
While also managing to be outright goofy.
Surf the web, surf the web.
Shut up, Brock, we don't have time.
But nothing ever feels out of place. His voice is instantly iconic, and I know some might prefer Hank Azaria for his work in the animated series, but with all the voice modifications done in that show, I prefer Norris's voice overall, as it's a more natural voice coming from his vocal range alone, with some reverb added in for effect.
The Venom Marathon continues on the biggest TV in New York. We're shouting out to the whole big rotten apple here, people.
To me, he is the Hamill to Joker for Venom, and will forever be the gold standard of Venom voices. Why no other Marvel production has come forward with offers for him to do the voiceover for Venom is an absolute mystery and a tragedy to me. Along with Romano, Norris is also someone who deserved way more cracks at the Venom character. And the rest of the voice cast is exceptional. I still do think that D. Bradley Baker is a little too eccentric as Carnage, but he's a psychotic homicidal alien maniac, so I guess it fits. The level design for this game is also pretty standard fare. Very linear with the exception of the maze.
Starting to sweat here, Parker?
By now, most superhero video games have adapted the method of having a sewer level and a secret lab level like it's mandatory. But Spider-Man 2000's levels are pretty decent, with good texturing jobs to let you identify where you are. There's only a handful of levels I feel don't really mesh well with the game flow, and they're primarily in the sewers. While the controls in this game work, they are admittedly stiff, given it's an old game, and having to platform on narrow platforms that have bottomless pits is never fun in any game, much less here. These levels also force you into using the manual targeting mode to proceed forward, bogging down the game's pacing. Surprisingly enough, it's the one and only time the game forces you to do so. It's like the dev team was aware that this kind of stuff wasn't really fun and actively tried to avoid putting players in positions where they had to use it. Other than that, you'll occasionally have levels that are a little too tight, causing some issues with the camera. But this has been a problem in every Spider-Man game, even Spider-Man PS4, which is why I always say that Spider-Man excels in open spaces. But with this game being as simple as it is, having the camera warp out sometimes isn't exactly the worst thing in the world, especially when it fixes itself. The last thing I wanted to touch upon in this review is story. It was the most in-depth thing that I looked at in the original review, but I completely missed the point. And to answer the question earlier, why is this game loved the way it is? Yes, I summarized the thing to its entirety and its outrageous plot, but the reason why this game is looked at with such fondness isn't because of its great plot or even its gameplay, but it's because of one word: charm. No matter how much you look at Spider-Man 2000's story, it is, for all intents and purposes, insane. An evil scientist and an alien symbiote looking to infect the world with an alien plague to take it over? Oh, good lord. Despite the ridiculousness of the plot, going through the game's beats opens up the Spider-Man world, introducing characters like J. Jonah Jameson, or even lesser-known heroes at the time like Daredevil. The more you go through the game and the more plot that you get unveiled to you, the more you realize that this game isn't so much of a serious Spider-Man game, but more of a celebration of the character and all the facets that have made the character prior to the game's release. Everything from the dark and gritty to the outlandish and insane. It's why I said earlier that the sound effects of the punches and kicks were probably intentionally cheesy by design. I think this case is further proved by the fact that there's so much extra unlockable content in the forms of comic book covers, as well as storyboards for the in-game cutscenes, and even the in-game comic book covers meant to showcase new chapters in the story alongside various costumes from over the years, and even character bios to get you more familiar with the Spider-Man lore. It embraces the outlandish from the comics, and it runs with it, adding in humor in all the right spots.
Look out, lady!
Oh my goodness!
But also pulls it back when it needs to so that it doesn't completely lose those who want things to make a little sense and have a little sense of seriousness.
New York City Police Department, cease and desist at once. Lay down your arms and prepare to...
This is exactly the opposite approach the sequel took, opting to make itself a little too serious, missing the charm of the original, which is why it wasn't looked at as fondly as this one is. You feel the love that Neversoft had creating, and it's contagious to the player, and it's why Spider-Man 2000, nearly 20 years later, is still one of the best superhero games ever. Like the back of the case cover says, you don't just play it, you live it. And in this era of gaming, Spider-Man 2000 was an absolute experience, and one that most could learn from today.